Hello, Year 10. I'm back again. I thought last week went quite well. I hope you found it supportive. I thought I'd do it again. I thought I'd try and do it every week for you because I think it's nice for me to feel like I'm having the same kind of contact with you, and I hope you're finding it helpful having me talk you through tasks rather than just seeing them on your screens. I'm going to talk through your essays. So I've picked out some really lovely examples of work to go through with you, and I'm going to prepare you for your next essay. So this week's essay I'm giving you feedback on. Next week's essay I'm going to give you I'm going to try and give you individual feedback again, where I recorded feedback for you personally and then uploaded that for you on Firefly. Let's get started. So the first thing to say is that you are amazing. Those essays were so good. I predicted accurately that you would be great with unseen poetry because you spent so long on the anthology poetry and you really do know what you're doing. So well done. There were some really strong essays in there. Brilliant work. The three things that I'm going to focus on as I'm feeding back with you are similar things that I always focus on when I'm feeding back to you. It's because they're important, okay? So if you feel like you're hearing a similar message, that's good. That means it's getting through to you that these are the things we need to focus on. So the first thing is that you've got to plan. I'm going to show you some lovely plans from people's work in a minute. If you just launch into an essay with no idea of what you want to say, you are going to panic, you're going to run out of things to say, and there's not going to be an overall structure to your essay. You're just going to be throwing ideas at the page. When you know what we want, and this leads into my next point, is we want to have a big idea introduction that is at the heart of your essay, and that needs to be your opening, and then everything needs to link back to that. Planning helps you to do that, okay? The examiner, when they look at that big idea introduction, and don't be fooled by thinking, oh, it's a big idea, so I need to write loads. You know from our work with Macbeth and our work with the anthology, it really is just 1 to 2 sentences that kind of boils what you're trying to say down. And sometimes that's tricky to do because it means being confident and it means pinning your answers down, and that is hard. But we know at the top of the mark scheme, where we're aiming for all of you, confidence and originality are some of the things we have to do. So if I wasn't pushing you to have that confident voice and to be original, I wouldn't be pushing you towards the top of the mark scheme, which is, I know, where lots of us are aiming for. Then we're going to look at, once you're in your paragraphs, some good examples of how you analyse those paragraphs in detail. First thing to say, if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about planning. The first thing I would definitely say is that you interpreted the poems brilliantly. So well. You'd really thought, your first time reading a poem sheet, everyone had really thought about what it is they wanted to say. So that was really impressive. I've picked out these 2 responses. Now, obviously, if we're in class now, some of you would be going, is that yours? Is that yours? We can't do that now. So it really does remain anonymous, apart from the people whose handwriting you are probably going to work really hard to recognise. So this first plan, if you'd like to, now would probably be a good time to pause the video. You can pause the video and have a look at the plans in lots of detail. And then I'm going to talk you through the bits that I like about them. Okay, I've just reminded you of why we plan. So if you have a look at the mark scheme, you can see that we're not just throwing ideas onto a page. We've got certain things that we have to do to get good marks. We have to be thoughtful. We have to have quotes. We have to analyse method, use terminology, and then comment on the effect of method. And so you have to plan to do those things. So what I really like about the typed plan that you can see there is that this person, they've got their big idea at the centre, and they have then said the comment in their planning. They've actually written down what it is they're going to say about the quotes. If you just write your quotes down, you might find when it comes to writing up that paragraph, which might be in 2 or 3 paragraphs time, you've forgotten what you thought about it when you were planning. So it's a really good idea to note down the terminology that you might use. It's a good idea to note down what it is you're going to say about the quotes. You don't want to write your essay at this point. These just need to be quick notes. if you look at the handwritten essay, you can see that they have done something very similar. They've just picked out the quotes. We've got modal verbs there. So they're starting to think, we've got the word personification. They're starting to think about the terminology they're going to use, and that will enable them to comment on effects. It's a good idea to get all of that done at this stage. And you can see that both of these people's big ideas are really clear and are going to really support them to show that they have that thoughtful, developed response. So you can see that careful planning has fed those big ideas. So planning is the first thing you must do. Lots of you did a plan, but for some of your plans, you were just putting your ideas down. You weren't perhaps putting down the quotes and the terminology. So that's the first thing that I'd like everyone to be doing in the essay for this week, which we'll get to at the end of the PowerPoint. Okay, so our next step is our introductions. I have picked out lots of introductions here, lots of really, really good introductions, and these are from a range of people. I could have picked out loads and loads more because you did write really well. And I've just put there the AO that this having a strong introduction is going to hit is that thoughtful, developed response to the task and text. So you can see the one thing I'd like to say about your big idea introduction is you do want it to stand out from the paragraphs you then go on to write. So if you look at the one that's on the bottom right of your screen, there's a really strong idea at the beginning there. The poet presents the idea of a child's feelings as challenging to express who you really are and be comfortable with yourself despite feeling, I'm not sure about that word, something by your inside thoughts. I would have gone to the next paragraph then to make your thoughtful, developed response really stand out. Remember, in our big idea introduction, we don't want quotes, we don't want subject terminology, we just want your main idea. Clearly, I've picked that out because it's really good, and what they do then go on to say and the analysis that person uses is really, really strong. But that would just be my word of kind of warning, I suppose. Make it stand out, make your introduction and your central idea, your big idea, stand out from what you then go on to say in your paragraphs. You can see over on the right, on the left, sorry, we've got the one in the middle we'll look at. Throughout Hide and Seek, the poet presents the child's feelings as something that can vary based on whether the child is alone or not. The child's natural feelings of confidence can easily be replaced by discomfort when left alone with their inner thoughts, which can easily take over a child's mind and begin to control how a child feels. So no subject terminology there, which is good because it's your introduction. A really clear, thoughtful, developed response that is answering the questions about the child's feelings, and it is showing a clear link to the text. So that's a really, really good introduction, nice and straightforward. So for our introductions, big idea, keep it separate to your beginning paragraph, no subject terminology, no analysis, we just want that central idea. Now we're going to move on to the next thing that I'd like you to focus on, which is the analysis within your paragraphs, okay? So analysis, obviously, is the central thing that we want to focus on. We know we need to have quotes. We know we need to be analysing the method, using subject terminology, and thinking about the effect of it. These three examples here do that absolutely brilliantly. And I suppose what I'm looking for, I want to be able to see in the very opening stages of your writing, I want to see the subject terminology. And it doesn't take long to scan through these paragraphs and see personification, personification, personification. So I know they have used subject terminology. And by focusing on the subject terminology, you're naturally talking about the method and then talking about the effect. I'm going to look at the typed one. Makes a normally peaceful space sinister, the darkening garden watches. The personification of garden suggests that when the child is alone, spaces are transformed into somewhere deemed dangerous for a young child. The verb darkening implies that the longer the child is left alone, the darker the child's thoughts and therefore world becomes. This makes readers feel sympathy towards the child, as no parent would want a child to feel alone and scared. It also makes the reader want to be with the child, to protect the child from their thoughts. That, in such a straightforward way, has gone here's my quote, the darkening garden watches. This is personification. I'm going to analyze it in detail by picking out the verb darkening, and then I'm going to talk about the effect. So in terms of AO2, that's excellent. You can pause and read through the handwritten versions which do something very, very similar. And what I love about these three examples, they're looking at the same moment in the poem, but they've got different things to say about them. And all of them are right because they support their idea with quotes, they analyse it in detail, and they're great. So what I'd like you to take away from this is not just this is how I do my analysis, but also there's no one right way to analyse a poem. You can come up with lots and lots of different ideas about a poem, and you should be coming up with lots of different ideas about a poem. Something that characterises essays that are at the top of the range are those that have original ideas. So don't ever think that what you think is, I don't know, not worthy of being written about. I had a revelation when I kind of got to university, I think, when I shared an idea at a seminar, and it was something that seemed so basic to me and so obvious because it was in my head, and I said it and everyone went, I've never thought about it in that way before. And to me, the idea wasn't something amazing because it's my idea. So why would I think it's just in my head and it's what I'm used to? But what you've got to remember is that nobody else thinks like you. So don't think, oh, that's really basic, or oh, I'm not sure if that's right. Have the confidence to say, yeah, I think this is what I think, because your idea of basic is someone else's idea of really complicated and original and interesting. Okay, so that would be my kind of takeaway from this. Don't, you all think about things in different ways, and we should celebrate that, and don't think that your idea is somehow not worthy, because it will be. Okay, so moving on, I just put this response on. This was somebody's response from your class because I just thought it was brilliant. So this person has managed to kind of and lots of you got all of this right, but this person has managed to have, they had brilliant planning, they have got a really good big idea introduction, and they've analysed everything in such amazing detail with real originality throughout their response. My feeling is this would be right at the top of the mark scheme. So I just wanted to show you what an all-round super duper response would look like across the board. So I would pause and I would read through this and just kind of think, what are the takeaways from this? What does this person do really well? Just to reiterate though, there was not one essay that I looked at and thought, oh, they haven't got this, or they've forgotten how to write essays. You are all writing at a brilliant standard. If I was to show you your essays from the very beginning of year 10, when we look in your purple books when we're back at school, when you look at those essays and you see how much you've developed, I think you would very rightly feel really proud of yourselves, because you are writing at a brilliant standard. And this essay in front of you now is kind of, it's right at the top, but you know, the majority of you are not a long way from this. So I don't think this is out of anyone's reach, but it's a brilliant example. I was really, really impressed by it. So I wanted to just show you this full response. So have a pause and read this through, and then we are going to go on to this week's tasks. Okay, so I'd like you to have a piece of paper, and you don't have to upload this for me, it can just be a piece of scrap paper, with this week's poems, and with any poem, something that I think is really useful to do, because you know you're going to be asked to comment on a particular theme or the poet's feelings towards a particular thing. And for these poems, it's about birth. So before you even kind of get to the poems, a really, really good practice, and you could do this about anything, so you could have done this for autumn, you could have done this for childhood, today we're doing it about birth. A really good thing to do is to think of, well, what would be a conventional, a typical, a normal, not normal, normal's the wrong word, ignore normal, what would be the typical conventional response to birth from a poet? So I've put down the kind of typical response to birth might be new life equals hope. Birth and hope go hand in hand. There might be some other things that you could include. So you could also include the opposite view. So whilst new life might equals hope, it could also be confusion or worry or concern, something like that. So as well as thinking about the conventional approaches, it also makes sense to then think about, well, what would be unconventional? What might we not look at? So an unconventional approach to birth might be, it's terrible. New life is the worst. Now, obviously, as a population, that's not really what we think. We want life. It would be an unconventional view to hold. That doesn't mean it's a wrong view. It's just unconventional. So I want you to pause and just write down all of the ideas that might come up because of this. Okay, we are then going to have a look at the poems. So these are the two poems that we are focusing on. I'm going to read through them for you. I'm going to share a few ideas on them. I'm not going to go too far with the ideas that I share on them, because this is about your response, and I'm conscious that if I keep on telling you what I think, then it's not really unseen poetry as it would be in the exam. It's me talking you through it all the time. So I'm going to try and hold it back, okay? So You Being Born by Brian Jones. I saw you born. It was remarkable. You shot out from between your mother's legs like a rugby ball from a scrum, and the stocky Geordie midwife caught you neatly and cried, "Whoops, she's come." You had a wrinkled, jammy head and spasmy legs like a portly frog's. From your belly button, a white root waved that had fed you all the months you'd grown and ripened in your mother's womb. And let me tell you, I'm ashamed. I forgot your mother completely. She had been those things to me that one day you'll discover in someone else and think, God, this is it, my sweetheart, my warm dear, my red hot lover. But for those moments, as the doctor shoved cotton wool up your flat nose and swabbed your eyes and cleaned your bum, I forgot completely all my life and love and watched you like a pool of growing light and whispered to myself, she's come, she's come. Okay, you can have a think about whether you think that's conventional, whether that's a conventional, obviously we've got a father's view here on his child being born. You can think about whether that's conventional, whether that's unconventional, whether that's how most fathers might feel on witnessing their child being born. There's certainly a real juxtaposition between it being a remarkable thing, but it's also quite graphic in parts of the description, in a way that makes it sound, I don't want to use the word gross because we're talking about childbirth, but yeah, in a way that makes it sound a bit gross. So have a think about that. What kind of response is that to being born, to birth? And now we come on to another poem. I'm going to try hard to keep my, I'm not going to manage it, but I'm going to try hard to keep my thoughts about this poet to myself. This is by Philip Larkin, who is a very famous modern poet, and he had quite a cynical and quite a misogynistic view on life. So you can imagine how I might feel about the poetry of Philip Larkin. So this has a dedication for Sally Amis. Tightly folded bud, I have wished you something none of the others would, not the usual stuff about being beautiful or running off a spring of innocence and love. They will all wish you that, and should it prove possible, well, you're a lucky girl. But if it shouldn't, then may you be ordinary. Have, like other women, an average of talents, not ugly, not good looking, nothing uncustomary to pull you off your balance. That unworkable itself stops all the rest from working. In fact, may you be dull? If that is what a skilled, vigilant, flexible, unemphasized, enthralled catching of happiness is called. It's quite I think, an unconventional view on birth. I think what Philip Larkin says there is probably true, that we all wish the best things, but that actually life can be quite dull. Maybe that's what he's saying. But I mean, come on, Philip, you know, a baby's just been born. We could be a bit nicer about it, couldn't we? there's quite an interesting comparison because it's both girls being born. And I think it's interesting that Philip Larkin, like, this is a baby who's just been born, and he focuses on appearance. I don't know if in our modern age, I don't know how we feel about that. I know how I feel about it. I'm sure you do too. But the fact that there's a focus on for a girl on how she looks from birth is something I don't like about this poem. Now, interestingly, I want you to complete the first time looking at a poem form for each of these poems and think about them in detail. We're building up to a point. So in the exam, I'm just going to explain this because I don't think I explained it very well last week. In the exam, you have 2 questions. One of your questions is worth 24 marks, and that's one that's just asking you to comment on one poem. Your other question is just worth 8 marks, and it's asking you to compare the views of 2 poems, but they're on the same topic. So for example, in your exam, you might have the question, write about the poem's feelings about birth for you being born, and you'd spend half an hour writing on that because it's worth 24 marks, sorry. And then you'd have a question worth 8 marks, which is saying compare how Born Yesterday and You Being Born, and look at the experience, look at the poet's feelings about birth. And that one's only worth 8 marks. So it's a very quick, whilst one poem does this, the other poem does that. Whilst one poem does this, the other poem does that. So that's the reason we're looking at 2 poems each week, but we're not doing that second part to the question yet. I'm going to spend a bit more time talking you through that next week. So what I'm going to ask you to do for this week, once you've completed your looking at a poem for the first time sheet, you are going to choose which poem you'd like to write an essay about. So I'm giving you the joy of choice. So you can either write a poem about you being born, or you can write a poem about Born Yesterday. We're not doing the comparative bit yet. You can choose which poem you write about, and I will give you verbal feedback on that. So just to go over it, some of you seem to have forgotten what the first time reading a poem form looks like and are skipping that bit. So just for clarity, I've popped it down there for you. Please do fill it in. I've planned this to kind of support you into, obviously an exam, you're not going to write out a grid and write in that much detail, but we're not in the exam yet, we're preparing for it. So it's really important you do fill those out. So like it says on here, do your form for each poem and then choose either You Being Born or Born Yesterday and think about how does the poet present the speaker's feelings. Please, please, please look carefully at that question. How does? The question wants you to focus on method, to focus on, yes, what does the poet think? And what's the big idea? What's your big idea in response to that question? But also, how do they do it? So you need to pick out techniques, and you need to pick out what you need to kind of talk about what those techniques suggest and what effect they create for the reader. Remind yourself, if you want, of some poetic techniques. For those of you who've taken your books home, which should be all of you, you have got notes in there from when we did our anthology work on different effects. Just as thinking about these poems and effect, some of the effects I might want to think about, something that not many of you talked about actually in your writing about the last poems was the structure. So with structure, as a rule, normally a regular structure indicates a regular state of mind for the speaker, and an irregular structure might indicate an irregular state of mind. However, we know that some poets might present very complicated and confused ideas in a regular structure to try and make it seem like they're fine on the surface, but underneath everything's not fine. We also know that sometimes poets use enjambment, which, if you remember, is where your ideas spill from one line into another to kind of convey an experience or how you're feeling. So you might notice that one of the poems does that, and one of the poems has got a very regular rhyme scheme, perhaps to reflect emotional absence rather than an emotional outpouring. And you'll probably know which one that's going to be, but have a think about it. I would go back before you start writing your essay. So do your form, do the first time reading a poem forms. Before you then write your essay, I would go back once you've planned it and perhaps look at the planning bit of this PowerPoint. Then have a little look at the big idea introduction bit, and then have a look at the analysis bit, just to guide you through each step. Now, like I said, with your next essay, I'm going to give you more personalised feedback, and I will also make another video talking you through how we begin to compare the poems for the 8-mark question with a new set of poems. I hope all of this makes sense to everybody. You're all very good at kind of sending me messages or emails and asking me questions. Please, please, please keep doing that. I want to make sure I'm supporting you as much as I can be without being in a classroom with you. Good luck. You are doing, I cannot tell you how well you are doing and how lovely it is to kind of go onto Firefly and see all the work you've been uploading and how hard you're working. You really, really are amazing. Year 10, you're doing so, so well, and I'm really proud of you. So keep up the good work. And I will be in touch over the week. And if not, I will see you. I'll see you here. I'll see you on YouTube in a week's time. I didn't think I'd ever be saying that in my teaching career, but here we are. Okay, so look after yourselves, take care and stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.